And welcome back to the Murdy Creative Co podcast. I'm your host, Colin Murdy, and today's topic is a new thought and the data dilemma. But first, I want to say thank you to everyone who supported the company so far. If you haven't got a chance, go check us out on the web at murdycreative.co. That's MURDY creative.co. You can also check us out on all the social media platforms. All of the links are on the top of the website at murdycreative.co. And there's also a link at the very, very top in the blue banner that allows you to join our Discord server. There's also a link in the top of the description of this video. We do a lot of behind the scenes on our Discord server. We talk with people directly. It's a really easy way to communicate with us and to get an answer back right away. And it's a great little community. So go ahead and join that if you're interested. So you may think to yourself, a new thought and the data dilemma? Why not a new thought on the data dilemma? It's because they're two different topics entirely. This is actually a bit of a 2-for-1 episode. So normally, previously, when I had more time, there would have been 2 episodes in a week, and this would have been an easy example of one where there would have been a Tuesday episode and then a different Thursday episode. But in this case, there's too much to talk about in too little time, so I'm going to do them both in a single episode. And I don't have a good segue between them, so we'll find out how this goes. I'm going to start with a new thought because that's what I put first in the title. So normally April's a good month for us. Virtually every year the company's been in business, April has been a solid month for us. I couldn't really explain why previously. I didn't really have a solid answer to it. And then about a year or two ago, I said, you know what? I think it's tax season. I think people are getting money back from their taxes. They paid too much to the government over the course of the year. They got new rebates, whatever. And because of the tax credits, they end up getting money back from the government, and then they go buy things that they have been wanting for a little while, but they didn't have the excess capital to do. Except this April has been really bad. And that actually helped reinforce the idea that this is what's happening, because I have asked 10 of my friends. Now, albeit my friends are of a specific age and, kind of economic status. So it's possible that's a very small, actually, it's not that it's possible. It is a very small sample size and very anecdotal, but all 10 of them have had to pay taxes this year when they got money back from taxes last year. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Are you also in this boat where you got money back last year and now you had to pay taxes this year? And virtually all of them, all 10 of them, were surprised by that. Now, I can wax poetically and politically about why that is, but the moral of the story is that does seem to be the case. And that is affecting us because we are downstream of that problem. And it actually has allowed me to say, okay, you know what? We need to be thinking about the tax implications of tax changes, expiring tax cuts and things like that. We need to be thinking about that ourselves because that will be something that affects our future Aprils. And we actually genuinely, we're very much counting on April of this year to be really good. And it actually helps reinforce the question of why did our February go so well and our March start off pretty well, and then it got cut off, obviously, because the Americana ran out. But why did it not come back afterwards? And I think the answer is that most people ended up doing their taxes in March. And by the end of March, they realized that they were going to have to pay money. And so all of a sudden, their budgets got really tight. And that would help kind of answer that question a little bit. Now, it's not good. It's obviously not good. All taxation is theft. Write that down. But also, when we look at the bigger, broader problem that this is going to generate, is it's going to have a ripple effect throughout the economy because a lot of businesses, I'd imagine, are like us, where they're expecting April to be good because it has been good for the last several years, and all of a sudden it's not. So, when we look at the macroeconomic effects, it's very important, I think, for small businesses not to look too big. And what I mean by that is this: it's very easy to get caught up when you listen to talk show hosts, or you listen to the news, or you listen to the radio, or whatever you listen to. If you read the newspaper, if you do anything outside of your own immediate community for education, information-wise, it's always abysmal. It's like there's very few people that go on, to television and be like, everything's great. Because that's not good, it's not riveting television, right? As humans, we're pretty wired to look for bad rather than good because that's the thing that ends up getting us in the end, and so we want to keep an eye out for it. However, it also means that small business owners tend to get the brunt of the worry and the anxiety surrounding large macroeconomic changes. And here's what I mean by that. If everybody in the world is saying, we're about to have a recession, right? Big businesses don't like that, but big businesses normally have access to capital. They have large access to capital. They can go borrow a lot of money if they need to in most cases, especially established businesses that have had a good banking relationship with a large banking partner for years. They can go say, you know what, we need money to float us in the meantime, right? And so large businesses can normally weather a downturn pretty well. I mean, they fire people, but that's life sometimes. And, they don't have to fire all their staff, that's for sure. And they streamline their product offerings to be the most profitable or the most efficient. And, that obviously has its ramifications on the bottom line for big businesses, but they don't go out of business normally. However, that's not true of small businesses. A lot of small businesses don't sell what I would describe as a core required product. That's almost always the domain of big business. And the reason why is very simple. Core required products, like toilet paper, for example, are very stable. And they almost always have a large capital intensive requirement. They're normally always very capital intensive. So they're very stable. They require a lot of capital to get started. And more importantly, there's normally a lot of profit involved in them because they're stable products, right? So if you've got a product that sells consistently in a certain volume all the time, and you don't really have to market that product because it's required, right? For example, nail manufacturers have the same thing, right? There's always going to be a basic demand for nails, and it's always going to be, X amount of demand pretty much. And obviously there's seasonality to that, but for the most part, it's very predictable and stable. If you're selling that kind of product, it gets very easy for you to say, we're going to optimize this for the most profitable version it can possibly be, and then we're going to go to volume. We're going to push as much volume as we can possibly make that the market can bear, right? So big business is almost always fundamentally supplying something that people need in large volumes. That's how they got big, right? Small business, on the other hand, has the flip side of that. Small business is oftentimes the artisanal or the unique or the niche products. They're the things that are cool and a specific small subset of the market needs them, but not all of the people, right? They're things like this, right? Leather journals, leather binders, folios, folders, notebooks, things like that. That's something that is not really a large volume profitable thing for most big companies, so they don't bother, right? Which is where the domain of the small business comes in. What that means, though, is that since small business often deals in niche products during a large macroeconomic downturn, when companies are tightening their belts, but more importantly, people are tightening their belts, individuals are tightening their belts, they often buy less of those niche products. I'm not even going to say luxury goods, because sometimes it's not luxury goods. It's just it's things that aren't expensive, but are not necessary either, right? They tighten their belt and they don't buy those things as much. And you start to see that the small businesses are the ones that suffer the most from the economic downturn. They're the ones that see the most significant drop-off in business. This becomes a problem that gets even worse when you consider the fact that most of them don't have a huge financial partner, or if they do have a huge financial partner, they don't have access to large capital from that financial partner, because most banks won't lend large amounts of money to small businesses, especially during a downturn, because it's risky, and banks are inherently built to avoid risk. And so small businesses are forced to borrow from riskier, or I would say more expensive sources because of the inherent risk involved in them. And so small businesses get hit the hardest in sales volume during downturns. They have to borrow expensive, risk capital from companies that charge much higher interest rates than are even based in the market. And then when the market picks back up, they're also the ones that maybe not pick up as fast. Or if they do pick up, they still have an enormous amount of debt that they have to pay off at the higher interest rates. So this is where macroeconomic trends obviously can cause a lot of anxiety for small business owners. It's a very serious thing we worry about. And I've had to, for myself, kind of shut that off a little bit. Because while everything I just said is true, it normally doesn't happen instantly. It normally doesn't happen in a very obvious way. It's not normally something that is, it doesn't always have to be the doom of your business. If you can be smart and you can, optimize, and you can kind of re-coordinate your marketing efforts, and you kind of focus on the things you're doing best, and you kind of double down on your successes, right? That's the areas where you see small businesses can succeed, even in bad conditions, right? Smart business is always smart business, regardless of whether you're a big business or a small business, right? So I have tried intentionally to kind of avoid some of the worst of the fear-mongering coming from the media around economic conditions, because it doesn't normally really affect us in a super obvious or in a really intense way. Except this. This is actually, I would arguably say, is one of the first macroeconomic conditions that has affected us in a way that I have noticed, that I've said, that's what's causing this, and I can see it clearly. So, now that I've been able to identify that the April effect is purely based off the tax situation, and the success of the April situation, or in many cases, the downturn of April's got what I'm now going to call in the future the tax modifier. If it's going to be a good tax year and people are going to get money back because there was tax cuts and things like that, we know April is going to be even better than a normal baseline month by a lot. And if taxes went up, tax credits expired, certain things are being, charged to the public, now all of a sudden we're going to start to see that same modifier go in the opposite direction, where suddenly it's going to take what would normally be a relatively modest baseline month, and it's going to make it much, much worse. And we just need to be aware of that. So this is a new thought for me, and it's something that I will say will affect us. Now, the good news is, for the most part, actually, a lot of the tax code changes for example, 2022 were done in 2022, right? They were predictable. Now, most people didn't know about them because they're not well advertised, because nobody wants to advertise that. But they were something that we could have known in January, right? Or even December. We could have gone into Christmas saying to our tax guys, hey, are we expecting April to be a bad month for us because we expect taxes to be high? And they probably could have given us a pretty solid answer to that question already. And we could have changed our plans had we really had that foresight, but now we will. So that's my new thought, and that's part of the reason why April is next. I do think that what's going to end up happening is this. I think a lot of people got hit with a tax bill they did not expect. It wiped out their savings, or it caused them to go, into a situation where they didn't have as much money as they thought they did. And they become very careful with their money. And I think that will happen for a month or two, maybe. Because I think most people don't want to think about themselves as poor. People work really hard, and the idea that you work really hard and you're also poor is a very annoying thought. It's something that really it makes people angry, right? So the way that people soothe that anger, they soothe that pride, is every so often they'll buy something that is a luxury that's expensive, but maybe not really expensive, right? And by buying that thing and having no negative economic side effects by buying that thing, they can kind of reinforce in their mind that I'm not that poor, right? If I was that poor, I wouldn't have been able to buy that thing without economic ramifications. So I think that our product actually fills that niche, that emotional niche of, it's a luxury product, it's expensive, but it's not so expensive that it's going to cause you economic repercussions. I think we fit that niche really nicely. And I think that right now, a lot of people aren't buying us because they can't, and they would feel economic repercussions from buying the product. But in a month or two, I think they're going to go back to saying, nope, now I got enough of a buffer that I'm going to go back to buying things that I probably shouldn't, right? Or that I should, but aren't maybe necessary, like toilet paper is, right? Although toilet paper is not necessary if you're really committed. So this is where we look at the issue that is a broader issue macroeconomically that's affecting us. And I do think that we'll bounce back from this. I do think that we'll see a bounce back in the whole economy in the summertime. Plus, summertime, sun's out, people are happy. That's a good thing. But we'll see, right? Time will tell. That's the way it goes. And now for a terrible segue. We're moving on to the data dilemma. I have been working the database for, what now? 2 weeks, 3 weeks now that I've actually been into the hard coding elements of it. Really the hard coding started really last week in earnest. And I've been building it in Google Sheets still. I've been building the JavaScript code on the Google Sheets data table structure, right? I've been basically saying, let's use this as an interim because it'll be a good place for us to build out the JavaScript and test it. And then we can port those same JavaScript programs over into the 5 database system because they use JavaScript and it's one for one for the most part, right? We do need to change how the data is referenced. And so I've been intentionally trying to write the code in such a way so that the data that we're drawing, that we're using, is passed into the formula as a parameter, right? So rather than the function that's doing the execution going into the database and grabbing what it needs out of the database, I'm taking, and the first step is get all of the data you need and then pass that into the function. Because that way it's database agnostic, right? So it can, whether it's you're doing it in Google Sheets or whether you're doing it in 5, the only thing you need to change is the function that actually draws out the data. The other functions that do things with the data don't matter. They're all identical. So I've been trying to write out this stuff, and I've been thinking to myself, we can make this work, right? We can make this work for a while. And then I was struggling to write a piece of the code. And I thought to myself, you know what I'll do? I will go and use ChatGTP, the new AI that's out, to help me write this code, because it's something that I'd actually tried 2-3 months ago, when I was first getting into database building, and I thought to myself, I need a teacher for my database building, but I need a teacher I can ask questions of, and I can't afford to pay a teacher who I can ask questions of. So ChatGTP was in the news at the time. I'm like, let's ask ChatGTP about things. And so I started to ask ChatGTP about database questions, like what's the best database building program? How do you build a database? Things like that. And it provided these excellent, complicated, well-written answers that sound like it was exactly as if a teacher was teaching it to me. And I was shocked then. And I kind of put it aside. But then I was struggling to write the code that I needed to write. For example, the real question was, how do I write and instantiate a two-dimensional JavaScript array? I knew how to do that in high school, way back when, but I can't remember the syntax of it. I know how to ask the question because I know what I'm looking for, but I don't know how to write the code. And I'm struggling to find good examples online because, well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But I want one that's relatively simple. So I pull up ChatGTP and I ask it that question, and it writes out the code for me. And not only does it write out the code, more importantly, it explains the code. It explains exactly what each step does, and it comments the code, which for those of you who don't know, commenting code is where you can put notes inside the code in lines at like certain lines of code. You can put descriptions that aren't executed, but they're good descriptions. It commented its own code in perfectly reasonable to understand human terms, right? So it's like, this is what's happening at this step. This is what's happening at this step in the code, which is super helpful. And then it described the code to me. Fascinating. It was crazy. So I ended up using the ChatGTP tool a lot to write out code and syntactically, do the code. And I mean, obviously I had to tweak it from time to time to make it fit exactly because it didn't have the whole code base that I had been writing previously to work off of, right? And so when I was writing code, I could provide it with some specifics about what I was looking for. I would describe what I wanted the function to do in plain words. And then I would give it kind of the parameters that I was passing to it. And it could write it out pretty closely, and all I would need to do is a little tweaking here and there. And that worked out really well. Actually, I got a lot of code written that way. Well, ChatGTP got a lot of code written that way. But we wrote out the program. And then what ended up happening was I had written it out a specific way. I had written a lot of it before I started into this. And so I was running the code. And I'll give you an example of one of the things the code does. It says, go into the general ledger, which is where we keep the individual records of each sale by SKU. So for example, if you go into if you buy a slim cut and you get an ad engraving, right? That's technically two line items. The slim cut is one line item, the ad engraving is another. There's a recipe for the slim cut. There's also a recipe for the ad engraving. It's nothing. But there's a slim cut for the ad for the slim cut. And let's say you buy two of them, right? So the way the general ledger works is it finds the recipe, and then it multiplies it by 2 and puts it in that line. And then that line is summed up to create one of the elements that does our inventory analysis, right? That keeps track of our ongoing inventory, right? So that's one element of this whole much larger database program. But so one of the things we need to do is to sum up the column. Right now in Google Sheets, it's a very simple formula. And I've been trying to write the database in such a way so that it can do even the simple formulas that we would otherwise have Google Sheets do in the code so that we can have it translate perfectly over to the new database, right? So even though Google's got an easy formula for that, I want to try to write it in such a way so that it doesn't need to use the Google formulas to do that. It can use the JavaScript formulas to do it. And so I had to teach the thing how to count, right? And because we were being specific in what we were doing, it wasn't that we wanted to just count generically. We needed to count a specific component from a specific start date to a specific end date, right? Well, that's logically not that challenging of a thing to build, and I had built it in a relatively, what I would describe as a relatively high school way of doing it. Now, it's not very efficient, and when I started to run it on the data that we had, and I had a really small data set that I was running it on, it took forever to execute. So I copied all of the code that I had written, and I put it into ChatGTP, and I said, how would you optimize this code for speed? And it came up with 12 different points. And they were complicated points. Like some of them were simple, right? Some of them were simple things like change your variables to a thing called let, right? So change it from var to let. It's a very simple thing to do. It's one of the new elements within JavaScript as of 2018. So it actually came in after I learned how to program in JavaScript, which is why I didn't know how to do it originally. But simply doing that improves the speed. And then it said what you need to, it literally advised that transitioning from a linear count to a binary search algorithm would be a faster way to run the code, which is genius. And I hadn't thought of that before. And I remember learning binary a binary search algorithm in high school, but I hadn't really ever used it in high school, and I hadn't used it since, obviously. And so I'm like, can you explain more about binary search algorithm? And it provided me not only the code to execute it, right, the code to write the binary search, it also created some examples from the data that I had given it, which was shocking to me. This is like some of the best, I don't know how to describe it. This is some of the best teaching I've had in a long time, right? This is like a teacher who knows not only how to explain it, but to give examples that are very prescient, that are very real in front of you. And so the code, the binary search is a very simple algorithm. I'll give you a simple taste of what it was teaching. Let's say you've got a big list, I should say, a big list of dates. And let's say that date correlates to a group of, in this case, recipe components, right? So you've got these dates, you got this recipe component, and you need to figure out all of the recipe components for this specific component that was used from this date to this date. Very simple kind of concept. Well, the problem is this: trying to go through and add up linearly, what the first thing that the pro code does is it says, is the date, going step by step, is the date within the range of dates, right? That would be how a linear mind would work, right? Yes, no, all right. If it is, add it up. If it's not, don't. Well, that goes line by line. Now, when you've got 10 lines, that's not so bad. When you've got 1 million lines, that means it has to search through 1 million lines. However, the way a binary search would work is it says this: first, sort all of the data by date, or whatever your metric that you're searching for is. Search it all by date, in this case. And let's say it's 1 million rows. Now you've got a 1 million row array, a million row matrix that has all of the dates in the first column and all of the other data you need in the other columns, right? The way a binary search algorithm works is it says, go to the middle, whatever the middle of the whole length is, and say, is what we're looking for less than or greater than this number in the middle here? And if it says, okay, well, it's less than, well, that means that the item we're looking for is only in the first half of the data. Okay, then it does that. It takes that, does the midpoint of that, and it says, is it before or after? So you can see that it basically is cutting the data in half every time it runs. Well, that means that in a 1 million cell or in a 1 million row spreadsheet, it would be able to find the start date in something like 30 runs, maybe less, depending on what you're doing and how accurate it is. But it can find it in 30 executions or less, rather than 1 million executions potentially. So what it does is it says, sort the array, find the start and the end of the data, and only add up the stuff between those two. Well, you can see how that is a way better way of doing an algorithm, especially on a large set of data, which is a big issue because we have a large set of data. So after rewriting the code to be this binary search algorithm, to run off this binary search algorithm system, right? And it helped me translate my code over to that, right? I mean, it wasn't the kind of thing where I'm like, just do it, and it did it, right? It was a little more complicated than that, but it wasn't much more complicated than that. After it had done this and it optimized the code, I then went in and put the data specifically from 8/1 of 2022 to 12/31 of 12/31 of 2022. So literally just the last, like, what was that? 5 months of the year. And I realized when I was copying the data over to my test bed where I'm testing this stuff, it was over 2 million cells in just that one spot alone. That means, estimated approximately, that every year we're generating in the general ledger sheet alone, not in the rest of the database, in just the general ledger sheet, something like 4.9 million cells of new data. Now that's a lot of data. Now, you're Walmart, that's not a lot of data. But if you're us and you're any small business, that's a lot of data. And more importantly, it's way, way more data than Google Sheets can handle. Which is why Google Sheets keeps breaking on us, amongst other reasons. But it was very eye-opening to do that, because I realized that even with my binary search algorithm, even with the code optimized, that amount of data in Google Sheets couldn't really be processed in a fast way. Now, there is a solution to it, and the solution is that rather than trying to process through all 2 million cells, we break up the data into weeks and months and have a code run at the end of the week and a code run at the end of the month in the middle of the night to add up just that week or just that month, create a history table, and then when we need to go add up data between specific dates, it goes and it rather than having to add up all of the rows for those dates individually, which would take forever, it will go into the history and it will add up the specific years that you need, plus the specific months you need, plus the specific weeks you need, plus the specific days you need that aren't otherwise counted for, and it'll do that. And by doing that, you can add up 7 years in the course of 30 executions, which would run in something like 7 to 10 seconds, right? So you could do that large set of data in 7 to 10 seconds by reorganizing the data that way. So that solution may allow us to get around, and continue to use Google Sheets for a little while longer. But overall, what this has shown me in all of this is, even with ChatGTP optimizing my code and helping me optimize my code for fast running, and even with it being set up to run fast, Google Sheets will not support the data unless we get really smart about the way we store it. Now, I'm actually pretty excited about this, because by being limited in such a way, it forces us to think about our database and to make the database run as efficiently as possible with the most speed-conscious structure of our data to make Google Sheets run. And when we copy that same stuff over, that same structure over into 5, which is an actual database program that runs on actual database software and stuff like that, that'll run like lightning. And it'll run like lightning for decades, potentially, right? It'll be, even if we have large sums of data, it'll still run very quickly. So that's all encouraging. But this dilemma of how much data that we're generating as a company is a dilemma. There is no two ways about that. And having to get smart about how we optimize that is going to be critical for our success. Because the point is this tool, when it's properly written out, when it's fully instantiated with all of its subcomponents, all of its subtools, all of the things that it will be able to provide from answers, that it actually makes up about the equivalent of one full-time person's job. It's able to do that kind of thinking. Now, we teach it to do that kind of thinking. It's not like that's, it's not like it's its own AI, right? Not yet, but it's going to be able to be pre-programmed with all of the complicated, but it's going to be all of the complicated formulas that happen over and over and over again, right? Consistently. So that consistent complexity being taken out of the day that we have to do, all of the humans have to do, which, by the way, consistent complexity is precisely where computers are the very best. So by having all of that, those questions like how much should we be doing in a day based off of our labor availability and based off of what needs to be done and based off the SKUs and based off of the lead times and all the computer can take all of that into account, and the formula that we teach it will allow it to spit out an answer as a recommendation. Now, it could come up with multiple recommendations based off of different parameters that we set for it, but either way, that takes an entire 3 hours, 2 hours out of the otherwise complicated work because it provides us with answers to the questions. So I'm very excited about this. I'm excited about this tool being implemented. And frankly, I'm very excited about what the tool can do. But the thing that's been the most shocking thing in the last week is how terrifyingly good ChatGTP is at helping me. And I do think it's going to completely reshape education, because it was one of the best teachers I've had in a long time, in that it allowed for me to rabbit hole my way down a topic, right? For example, I started off by saying, what's the best method of using, what are the best methods for using forecasting based off data? And it gave me a list. And I said, okay, well, can you explain ARIMA to me? Which is autoregressive, something like that modeling. Anyway, it's a type of statistical modeling. And so it described it to me. And I said, okay, can you explain to me just this subcomponent of it? And it said, sure. So I was able to ask it rabbit hole questions all the way down, and it was able to answer questions all the way down, right? Now, are those answers correct? Well, you have to ask yourself, are those answers, would a human teacher have answers that were 100% correct? I don't know. I don't think so. Right. So the question you really have to ask yourself is ChatGTP's artificial intelligence and its language development programming as good or worse or better than a human teacher doing the same thing? And I would be hard pressed to say that ChatGTP is worse. Now, ChatGTP has boundaries that have been put on it artificially by its developers, specific things that it can't answer, specific things that it won't answer. For example, there was an article I was reading that was talking about how people were using ChatGTP to write legal cases for them. So they weren't hiring a lawyer. They were telling ChatGTP, write me a legal case based off of these parameters. And it would spit out a legal case. And from what I read in the article, they were good legal cases. They were very well written, very well researched. They had all of the references to prior case law. They had they were good opinions, right? And then ChatGTP got that shut down because, well, obviously that's legal advice, and well, we wouldn't want the lawyers not to make their money, would we? So this is where we got a problem where, because this technology the limits are, I don't know where the limits are on it other than what we put on it. And there have been very good examples of people getting around ChatGTP's limitations. What I will say, though, is if you're looking for specific topics that you want to know more about, particularly topics that are, for example, computer programming related, specifically topics that are like, I would say like geography questions, right? Or questions that are not, I would say, politically hot topic button questions, but are just like questions about, I don't know, space, right? Things like that, generic questions that don't require it to form an opinion, like questions that are more fact question based. I'm sure that it would be an incredibly good teacher, right? You could ask it, how does quantum mechanics work? And it would probably be the best teacher you've had in a long time for quantum mechanics. And by the way, it goes so far as to say, if you wanted to ask it a question saying, explain quantum mechanics to me like I'm a fifth grader, it would be able to do that. So it can do things such as, if you said, pretend like you're a test proctor for the ACT and write and quiz me using ACT questions and grade them, it would do that for you, right? It can do that kind of work, and that's the kind of tool that it is. So obviously, check it out for yourself if you're interested and you're curious. But for us, for me, for building out this database, it has been a huge help. And it's helped me solve some of the data dilemma problems that we've had, where it's been an enormous, massive sum of data that is just impossible to analyze under linear thinking terms. And it's helped me optimize the code significantly without having to hire a programmer. And that's a huge help, right? For me not to have to pay, $50, $70, $100 an hour for a programmer to help me with this, that's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Be sure to check back in Thursday for the next topic. And don't forget to check that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to get notified right away. I want to hear from you about what you thought about this episode. I want to hear from you about the text questions or ChatGTP or data dilemmas or how to build out databases. I want to hear from you in the comments below. So please mention something in the comments below. It does help us with the algorithm and makes YouTube think people like us. So feel free to do that. Also, if you have any questions or concerns or anything at all with any of the products that we sell and you want help with that, please feel free to reach out to us on the main page of our website at murdycreative.co. That's MURDY creative.co. There's a there's a contact form there. You can also send us an email, sales at murdycreative.co, sales at murdycreative.co. You can call us on the phone at 414-434-9001. We're available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time. You can also text us at that number as well, 414-434-9001. We're available to help. We want to help. You can leave us a voicemail. If you don't get a hold of us, we do call people back. So definitely reach out to us however is best suited for you, and we would do our best. If you think we deserve a good review, go a long way to help us grow. You can read all of our good reviews by going to murdycreative.co/reviews with an S to read our reviews. But if you want to leave a review, you can go to murdycreative.co/review, singular, or murdycreative.co/leave a review. That allows you to, that'll redirect you to wherever is best for you to leave a review, Google, Facebook, things like that. Right now, I believe it's Google to help with our SEO. We've moved it around a couple of different places because obviously you want to have reviews on a bunch of different platforms where people are looking, because you don't know where people are going to be looking. So please leave us a review. It really does make a great difference. We really appreciate it, and it does help us just feel the warmth and love from you who love us. Where was it going? Word of mouth, best form of advertising. So tell your friends and family, tell your enemies. Like I said, it's always, I don't care who buys our product in that regard. Bottom left-hand corner of the website, I'll get you a little something for doing that. Check out the rewards program overall. It's pretty neat. You can get free stuff if you're really dedicated to the cause. So check that out. Also, if you have any podcast topics you want to hear more about, send them my way. It is hard to come up with topics sometimes. I mean, not this week. We had 2 topics this week, but sometimes it's really challenging. So feel free to ask questions about if you want to know more things about specific background things or whatever. If you were looking for a custom engraved item, we have no minimum order quantities and no setup fees. It's a simple flat fee, normally about $15 plus or minus. Most of the customizer is back up and functioning right now, so you can go to any product page on the website. You click the blue button that says add logo or add custom logo or whatever it says. That'll take you to the custom version of that product, and you can launch the customizer from there with that blue button on that page. You can add your own logos, you can add your own text, you can reposition, rotate, resize, all that good stuff there, and then you can hit checkout. And once you hit checkout, it'll take you to the cart with that custom product already added there. You can get custom discounts as well. You can get bulk order discounts on everything. All you need to do is add whatever items you want to your cart, custom or otherwise, and it will automatically calculate the bulk discount appropriate for that quantity. So if you want to get just one customized thing, you can. But if you want to get a whole bunch for your company, for, I don't know, as a prank, I don't know what people do. You can put a meme on it and do a prank. I don't know. Either way, if you want to do something like that, you can just add all of the things you want to the cart. You can, if you're in the cart and you added something custom and you wanted 20 of that thing, you can just change the quantity right there. You don't have to go back through the customizer again. And then it'll automatically apply the appropriate discount when you hit that checkout button. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a great day and goodbye.